No fire drills planned for this evening. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, please leave the building via the nearest exit and make your way to the assembly point located at the Market Car Park adjacent to the Civic Suite building. Please be reminded to switch off your mobile phones and turn any other electronic devices being used to silent. Please note that the meeting will be live streamed where the proceedings are capable of repeated viewing. I would like to make members aware that while the presentation by officers is being shown, this will be the image that will be seen by the public on the live stream. Please ensure your microphone is switched on when speaking and you speak clearly into the microphone. If you are seated in the public area of the chamber, it's likely that your image will be captured by the recording cameras and result in your image becoming part of the broadcast. If members are for any reason not present for the whole debate of any item, you should consider and seek advice as necessary on whether it would be appropriate for you to vote on that item. Item 1. Apologies for absence and substitutes. Apologies received from Councillor Page, substitute Councillor Cross. Councillor P. Shaw, substitute Councillor Steptoe. Item 2, none members in attendance. Councillor McPherson, Councillor Marriott. And Councillor FD. I do apologise, Councillor FD, you're just not on the list, but I can see you there clearly. Well, I do apologise, you are on the list, but not in written writing. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of December 2024. Are the minutes agreed? Agreed. Item 4, to receive declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. Member of Essex County Council.
Councillor Mrs Shaw.
Thank you, Chairman. Non-pecuniary interest. I'm a member of Essex County Council.
Councillor Myers.
Ward Councillor for Great Wakering and Foulness.
Thank you. Item 5, items referred from the weekly list. There are no items referred from the weekly list. Item 6, 24/00455/4, Fairlawns Farm, Chelmsford Road, Rayleigh, Essex. Katie Rogers will present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Can you sit a bit close? Okay, this development is proposed to a site adjacent to the Fairglen interchange roundabout to the west. Can't hear. It's okay. There we go. I'll just sit. Nice. Okay. Start again. Is that better? Great. So this development is proposed to a site adjacent to the Fairglen interchange roundabout to the west of Rayleigh. The railway line can be seen, if you can see my cursor just moving to the right-hand side there. So that's the northern boundary of the site. The railway line runs adjacent to that. There is an existing access to the site just here on the western boundary onto the A1245. And otherwise, to the east of the site, in this area here, the site adjoins open agricultural fields. So on the screen now, you can see an aerial image. And if I just take my cursor approximately round the site boundary, you can see here is the northern boundary of the site, alongside which the railway runs, and then the western boundary alongside the A1245. The southern boundary is adjacent to the A1, or roughly adjacent to the A127, and then this is the eastern boundary of the site with this hedge line you can see there. So in the centre of the site, there is some existing development, some storage uses and some buildings, but otherwise the site is generally open and undeveloped, apart from an access track running from the existing access point here. And there is an existing tree line through the site which runs along a ditch, which is partly open in this sort of central area of the site, and partly culverted. The site is currently used as an existing showground for different events, and temporary marquees are erected in connection with this use throughout the year. In terms of context, members will note to the west of the site here, in sort of bright whitey grey colour, is the Arterial Park business site. And also members will note just to the northwest of the site here, the Rayleigh main substation, to which the site will be connected through or via an underground cable. So on the screen now you can see the proposed site layout plan. The proposal is for a battery energy storage system development, and this would involve the siting of 92 battery storage units. These are shown, I'll just zoom in. So these are shown as the black rectangles on that plan that are laid out in sort of a grid formation. Other infrastructure would also be provided, including inverters sited close to the storage units, and a number of switchgear containers would also be sited, and these are shown on this plan. Might have to just zoom in slightly further. So these larger containers are these white rectangles. You can see one here. You can't see my cursor very well, I'm afraid, but there are 5 of those proposed as well. The blue shaded circles, of which there are 2, sort of to the southern edge of the site, are 2 water storage tanks, which are also proposed. In the northwestern part of the site, so that's this area here in the northwest, it's edged, if you can see it, with a sort of light blue dashed line. This is a separate site compound, and this would house an on-site substation and control room. As members can see, the proposed infrastructure would occupy a large proportion of the site, and this would be fenced. This is in the position of the dashed black lines, so this dashed black line around the 192 battery storage units, and the light blue dashed line around the substation compound. Access to the site, as I've mentioned, would be via the existing access point onto the A1245, which is shown in this sort of blue hatching in this position where my cursor is here. A secondary vehicle access would also be proposed, and that would be onto the from the southern boundary onto the A127 in this blue hatched coloured area here. That would be for emergency access only. And Essex County Council have been consulted on this, the Highways Department, and raised no objection. So the batteries would be housed in rectangular containers, and members will note from the plan on screen that these would be of an industrial appearance. They would have a height each of around 3.1 metres from ground level. There would be a customer control room building, and this would have a shallow pitched roof, you can see on the bottom image on that plan, and that would have a height of approximately 2.5 metres. The switchgear containers that I mentioned were white in colour but rectangular again on the layout plan, would have a greater height. They would be raised off the ground with a height of some 4.1 metres from ground level. So this plan shows a cross-section of the substation compound, which would be in that northwestern corner of the site, and the infrastructure which would be housed within this area is shown. You can see to either side, so you can see my cursor on the right-hand side here, and then on the left-hand side here, you can just see the 4-metre high acoustic fence which is proposed, and then the height of the sort of infrastructure and development within that compound in relation to that fence. The water storage tanks, there's an indicative image of those on the plan on screen, and they would be circular and have a height of 4.6 metres from ground level. So the plan on screen here is a landscape mitigation plan. And soft landscaping is proposed, which would include native hedgerow planting around the southern and western perimeter of the battery storage area. Trees would be planted, and these would be large in stature with a girth of 18 to 20 centimetres and a height of some 5 metres when planted. And this is in an attempt to give some sort of instant impact to the landscaping. But over time, the trees and vegetation, as it matures, would offer greater screening benefit. So this section of the landscaping to the eastern boundary shows a bund that would be provided. If you can just see, sorry, my cursor. So this is the site where the storage containers would be sited, or the edge of it, and then this is a section from that point through the east, or to the eastern boundary, which adjoins the agricultural field over in this point here. The existing hedgerow would be retained along this boundary, and then you would have a bund formed, and then the trees planted, some at a lower level, but some at a raised level on top of that bund. So the scale of the proposed development is significant. It would have a clear impact on landscape character and visual amenity, but the character of the land surrounding the site has been taken into account in the assessment of how significant the harm would be that would result. And this raised bund, together with the planting, would in time help to mitigate the visual impact of this development, particularly when viewed from the east. So I'll just take you back to the layout plan. So perhaps the key consideration in the determination of this application is the acceptability of the proposed development which would occupy this Greenbelt site. The committee report identifies that national Greenbelt policy has recently changed to include a new category of development which must now be considered appropriate in the Greenbelt in certain circumstances. This site is considered to meet the new definition of Greybelt land contained within National Planning Policy Framework, and for the reasons set out in the published report, officers consider that this, despite the proposal being for large-scale industrial-type development in the Greenbelt, it would nevertheless be appropriate. Officers are satisfied that there is a demonstrated need for this type of infrastructure development, which would support the development of renewable energy projects for which there is a very clear national planning policy support. The proposal is acceptable in relation to impacts on the highway, as I've mentioned, and the site would also not be affected by highway works consented to the Fairglen interchange. So these consented highway works, if you can see my cursor, seek to create a new slip road which would come southbound off the A1245 to meet the Fairglen interchange roundabout, and then skirt round, and the slip road would then join onto the A127. So that would be utilising this area outside of the redlined application site, and those highway works are consented, likely to happen, we think, and would not interfere with the proposed development here. In terms of surface water drainage, the lead local flood authority team at Essex County Council raised no objection, subject to the imposition of conditions to require approval of detailed surface water drainage scheme. And members will note other planning conditions have been recommended, which include the requirement for the acoustic fence that I mentioned earlier. And there's no objection from the Council's environmental health team with regard to the impact resulting from noise generated by the development. I might just point out that in terms of the noise assessment, really what we're looking at is impacts on the nearest residential properties. The nearest to the north is beyond the railway line in approximately the position where my cursor is here. There is also a property to the west near to the Arterial Park development, but that is obviously separated from the site by a significant road junction and the noise associated with it. So all of those are considerations in terms of how likely this site is to generate noise, which would be unacceptable. There are other sporadic residential properties south of the A127, but the sort of main urban area to the east is set quite a distance away. The applicant proposes to deliver on-site habitat creation and enhancement, which they would be required to manage and monitor for 30 years. So this would be, if you back to this landscaping mitigation plan, in these margins around the site, and would include a new watercourse. This would be a re-sited watercourse, the existing watercourse having been essentially moved further south. This, together with some off-site measures, would satisfy the requirement that the development achieve the minimum 10% biodiversity net gain. Members will note that the recommendation of approval is subject to a legal agreement to require the developer to pay a financial contribution to the council. This would be for the monitoring of the habitat enhancement on site. The recommendation, Chairman, is one of approval, subject to the published planning conditions and the legal agreement.
Thank you, Katie. We have one public speaker for this item. Miss Price will speak in support of the application. Miss Price, if you'd like to come over to this area. Are you familiar with how the microphone works?
Thank you, Chair.
You have 5 minutes for your speech.
Thank you. So good evening, members, and thank you, Chair. My name's Sarah Price. I'm the agent for this application. I thoroughly endorse the recommendation given by your planning officer. I would just like to raise a few other points in addition to those. Firstly, as set out in the report, it's essential that we provide battery energy storage systems such as that proposed to be able to meet the demands associated with our transition to net zero and a renewable energy future. The 7th carbon budget, which was published just a couple of days ago, emphasised even further the need to provide this sort of storage capacity. As your officer set out, this site is a very suitable location for this type of development. It's not close to where people live. It's classified as meeting the tests of grey belt in the new NPPF, which was published at the start of this year. It's also within flood zone 1. It's not best and most versatile agricultural land, and therefore all of these characteristics together mean that it's very suitable for a battery storage proposal, also that can connect very closely to a large substation through a very short cable route. As set out in the report, the battery storage proposal is temporary, so the consent that we are seeking is for 40 years. After that time, the equipment would be removed and much of it's recyclable. The scheme has also taken a highly responsive and responsible approach in terms of managing fire risk. The systems that are available now and will be implemented on this site are focused on ensuring that fire doesn't break out. That's done through ensuring sufficient separation in the units and imposing a system very similar to a sprinkler system in a building, whereby if sensors are triggered, the sprinklers effectively flood the individual units, meaning it can never spread between units. So what that means is that fire shouldn't break out in the battery unit at all. That's very much a development in technology since some of the previous older systems that have been implemented. This system meets the up-to-date guidance issued by the National Fire Chiefs Council as well, and we've been working closely with your officers on all the other matters that were mentioned earlier to ensure that we can get to this position that the application has been recommended for approval. So really, I'd just like to finish on saying that we believe this is an essential project. It's got the support of your officers and also other statutory and technical consultees. There have been no public comments on the application, and I really remain here for any questions if councillors wish. I'm also accompanied by my client from Gresham House, the applicants, who, between us, if there are any further questions, we'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Price. I was going to ask you if you could remain there for the time being, so thank you for that. Ward members to speak first. Are there any ward members who would like to speak? Which is Councillor Cross, myself, Councillor Linden, and Councillor Sutton. Councillor Cross. Are you, Councillor Cross, are you speaking as a ward member or a member of the committee?
Well, both really. Yeah.
No, it's a ward member or a member of the committee.
Oh, I see. Right. As a member of the committee, then.
Right. If you can wait till you called on that one, then please. Any visiting members wishing to speak? Councillor Hefty. First of all, Councillor Hefty, I do apologise about before. I got confused with Councillor Shaw, who's not here, and yourself, and my little grey cell's got a little twisted round, so I do apologise.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say, with green energy, this is most needed, and it's a good place to have it. It's very near the substation, very small cabling, which will lose less DC. I can think back to school time, and just like other thing I'd like to mention, there was a fire a couple of days ago in Tilbury, which broke out with the construction stage. So I'm not talking about where the batteries are already in place, where they've got all the water that's going to contain any damage. So I'd just like to know when the construction is, what have they got in place to help with if there is a fire that breaks out like they did in Grays. Thank you.
Katie, would you like to answer that?
I'm afraid that I don't know anything about the fire that broke out at Grays and what that was associated with, and I'm not clear what the risk would be in terms of fire during construction, and at what point that risk might kick in. But certainly there is as set out in the report, there is a requirement for a fire risk strategy or management of that risk to be undertaken by the developer via separate legislation to the planning regime. So certainly once operational, there will be checks and measures in place to make sure that that happens, and that's updated annually and any recommendations are actioned.
Thank you, Katie. Councillor Hefty.
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, as long as there's something in place.
All right, thank you. Right, committee members wishing to speak. I have Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I've got to say that having been over to the site and spoken to the office or spoken to the people that are going to develop the site, I'm quite impressed with the work that they're going to do and the safety standards that they're going to keep. However, I do have a couple of questions that need to be answered. That is, when the development comes to cease in its time lapse, how will that site be left? Will it be recovered as a greenfield site to be used as a greenfield site and not a greyfield site? And also, there's going to be a considerable time it will take to dismantle everything. So will that come in the time lapse, or will that come after the time that this operation is working? Thank you.
Katie?
Yeah, if I could point members to condition 2 on page 6.2. There is a requirement for the site essentially to be restored and all development removed. That doesn't mean that the biodiversity enhancements that are taking place can be interfered with, so that they would be sort of left. And it does say that there'll be a scheme of works, if you like, for the restoration to be submitted and agreed.
Councillor Stanley?
Thank you, Chair. But if it takes 2 or 3 years to develop the site, to put it all together, it will take 2 or 3 years to dismantle the site. So does that time lapse come within that time that this development requires, or is that after that? And that wasn't mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Katie?
Just refer back to condition 2 again. So the condition reads that the planning permission should be limited to a period of 40 years, commencing from the date electricity is first stored at or distributed to the national grid from the site. So the 40-year period is from that point onwards, after which there is a requirement to permanently remove from the site the infrastructure that's part of the consent, and it be restored back. Now, that may take a while, I don't know exactly how long, but that has to be done in accordance with the scheme of works, which can include a timetable for those works.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Councillor Stanley. I think that's now been covered. Councillor Cross?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'd just like to know, I suppose I should declare a non-pecuniary interest as ward councillor in Wheatley Ward.
Sorry, could you actually in future put your hand up and put that through the chair, please? Any queries whatsoever regarding hearing or anything else? 1 second, please. 1 second, please, Councillor Cross. Right, Councillor Cross, matter of clarification. If you speak as a ward member, you will not be able to vote. If you speak as a committee member, you will be able to vote.
Yes, I'm speaking as a committee member, temporary committee member. Just on the 40-year subject, at whose...
Could you go close to your mic, sorry, Councillor Cross?
At whose expense will the dismantling be? Is that down to the operator, to Gresham, or that's one question. But also, why is, if it's needed for energy storage, which obviously it is, and I think the UK needs 27 gigawatts by 2050, if I'm not mistaken, maybe earlier. Why after 40 years is it no longer required? Surely we need these battery storage systems all over the country. It's not like they're suddenly not going to be needed in 40 years' time. So I'm not, it's far enough down the road to not worry about for now, but I'd just like to know why they won't be needed in 40 years' time. Hopefully we have fusion energy by then, but...
Thank you, Councillor Cross. Katie?
So the first question, I think, was around who's responsible for restoring the site. So there is a condition 2 requiring that the site be restored in accordance with the scheme of works that agreed, and the council can enforce that condition on the landowner. So whoever owns the site at that point in time, we could enforce the requirements of that condition against them. And then the second question about the 40 years, I don't disagree that it would seem that it might still be able to function and be needed after the 40-year period, but the consent that's been applied for is a temporary consent for 40 years. So that's on the basis how the application has been determined.
Thank you, Katie. I'd like to direct the question to Sarah Price.
Actually, you'll direct the question to me and I'll direct it to who it goes to.
I stand corrected, Chairman. Can you ask Sarah Price, please, why the facility won't be needed after 40 years' time?
Katie, do we have an explanation for that?
So I don't, and I don't think as part of the application, I hadn't read anything that's been submitted that explains that. So I'm afraid I can't give an answer to that.
Ms Price, would you like to give a brief explanation, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The 40 years is based on the anticipated lifetime of the technology. That's why it's 40 years. As in the batteries we produce at the moment that will be developed here, that's how long it's anticipated it would last, which is why we've gone for that time. In terms of what happens in 40 years, I think, as the councillor said, that's sometime in the future now. We don't know what will have been anticipated and developed in terms of new technologies. So on the basis that this is a proposed development on a greenfield site, the approach was to apply for a temporary consent consistent with the anticipated lifetime of the technology.
Thank you. Ms Price. I said thank you, Ms Price. Councillor Eaves.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Efty brought up one of the points I was going to bring up, so thank you for that. The other one is just a very small one with regards to conditions 14 and 15, with the possibility of noise problems there. We did in the presentation hear that there are residences that are reasonably near, but not actually close. But I note in the conditions that if there are any additional attenuation needed, that there's a 3 months period post-construction. Can we ensure in some way, shape or form to inform the near neighbours of that condition? Because the one thing I can see happening is that it takes a long time sometimes for residents to realise the problems, and we could go outside the 3 months. So I'm just wondering if we could just have an action out of this. I don't know how you'd actually phrase it, to let the residents know that if there are any complaints, they've got 3 months to actually raise them. After that, it's done.
Thank you, Councillor Eaves. I do actually remember at the site visit, and I'll just remind all members we have had a site visit excuse Excuse me, we've also had a question and answer teams, and you were also asked if there were any technical questions to write in before this meeting. I'll just remind you of that. But I think actually on the site visit, they did actually state that they would be making sure they notified any close residents of all movements that were going on, because they wanted to be. I'm just saying they were doing that. So yes, that should actually be, I believe, written in there. Thank you, Katie.
I'm just giving that some thought. I think I can understand why the suggestion has been made. I think what condition 15 is seeking to do is, rather than respond to a noise complaint, is to assess the level of noise, sort of scientifically, if you like, measured. And I think that is the key, and perhaps that will still ensure that the noise environment is acceptable, without the need to notify the neighbours and alert them to sort of listen out for, is there any noise sort of bothering you? Because there could well be noise bothering them, but it's about the degree of that, and it's the measured level of noise and whether that is significant or not. What I would say is I have had conversations with the council's environmental health officer about the noise report, and this is sort of a belt and braces approach. I don't think they anticipate that there will be a problem. The existing noise environment in that location is such that I think they don't anticipate it being a problem, and there is a railway line in between, and it's a fair distance. I haven't got the exact measurement. It might be mentioned in the report, the sort of distance in metres, if that gives you some comfort.
Councillor Reeves, I think actually there's 27 conditions in this on this report and planning application. I think they've extensively covered, and I do believe, I think Miss Price, and I do know at the site visit they did actually say they were quite happy to work very closely with us in making sure that they covered all of our issues, particularly with the residents on that one. Councillor Steptoe.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm not quite sure how to categorise this, whether this is a question or an information or quite. I'm looking at page 6.36, the top paragraph, which is marked number 3, and the last sentence, where it refers to the layout and design should not impede on the proposed highways fairground improvements. If I could have the drawing up on the screen where it showed the entrances in blue, please.
Sorry, Councillor Steptoe. 6.36, item
6.36, it's the top paragraph marked number 3.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. What I've got a bit of a concern about is that there was a meeting this morning discussing this works for the Fairground intersection, and the best I can say at this stage, in highways terms, the works are imminent. And by that I probably mean 6 to 9 months. What I'm concerned about is why the bell mouths come out from those 2 blue exits or entrances. This new slip road will cut across both of those. So I would like to suggest that perhaps the developer needs to just go back and have a further conversation with Highways, because I suspect those bell mouths will be built in the wrong place.
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. Again, I do know on the site visit this was covered and there was conversation. I'll ask Katie to come in on this, please.
I was going to say that originally the developer submitted a red line, a site layout plan, and all their plans essentially showed the new layout of the Fairglen works. And what we actually went back to them and said is, we do need a plan. It's good that we had that, comfort that the scheme does work with the Fair Glen interchange works, and that was shown. But actually, at this point in time, when we are granting planning permission, those works haven't happened. They might well be imminent. So the plan we've now got is the requested plan showing how it works without those Fair Glen interchange works having taken place. But Essex County Council have been consulted on this application. The Highway Authority are satisfied that these plans that have been submitted could be approved if you so decided to, and that they have no objection in highway terms.
Thank you, Katie. Councillor Stepp.
Yes, it's just with regards to the conversation we literally had this morning. If this had come up yesterday, I wouldn't have been able to say this, but I would strongly recommend that the developer goes back to highways, has a further discussion. I'd hate them to have to spend all the money in putting the Bellmouth in, and then in 9 months' time have to dig it up again.
Thank you, Councillor Stepp. So,
I think it's important for the developer to do.
Mrs. Price, Miss Price.
Thank you, Chair. And a very valid comment made by the member just now. As Ms Rogers stated, we have submitted plans that show the alternative arrangement with Fair Glen in place. And we have spoken to Essex specifically about these plans and conducted a road safety audit on them as well. So we're happy to continue those discussions, but I think it can be, post-decision. Those plans are in place and can be implemented if required.
Thank you, Miss Price. Councillor Stepp, sir.
Yes, it's just that they're fine-tuning the plans as we spoke this morning. I'd just offer that as a sensible suggestion. Don't waste your money on a Bellmouth that you're going to have to dig up in 6 months.
Okay, thank you. And I said during the site visit, it was actually stated that they were fully aware of what was going on, and they'll work very closely with highways in respect to that going forward. Yeah, we don't want to dig up 2, 3, 4 times, do we? Councillor Cross, we have just checked, and we will allow you back in to answer your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Right. I have a question regarding condition 11, which is on page 6.2, I believe. It refers to 2 options for the paint colour for the containers containing the batteries of either mahogany brown, whatever that is, or basalt grey. I was just wondering why not green, but what does it really matter? Because the 4-metre high acoustic fence is going to prevent any sight of the containers, I would suggest. And on the subject of the acoustic fence, why would that not be green? I think it's called natural coir finish, which is coconut husk. So presumably it's a light brown colour until the ivy grows over it. But I was just wondering why that wasn't chosen to be green from day one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. Katie?
Thank you. I think the fence could be whatever colour members choose. I don't think the developer would mind. If I just, though, take you to the landscaping plan. So if you can hopefully see, I can zoom in. Let's just zoom in a little bit. So there will be native hedgerows and trees planted around, in close proximity, if you like, or around the perimeter of the acoustic most of the acoustic fence. So in time, it will be shielded. And there is an intention, I think, to also allow sort of have the coir finish, which allows the ivy to sort of grow up. But the fence could be a different colour that's specified, and I don't think that would be objected to. In terms of the battery storage containers and the colour of those, I think it's less about the possibility of an up-close visual appreciation of these containers where they're sited, there obviously is a road that runs close by, but there isn't many opportunities for people to walk anywhere near this site. What you'd get is longer distant views. And actually, I did go to the sort of nearest, or one of the nearest public footpaths, which is on the sort of western edge of the sort of Rayleigh, and look at the site. And it's a raised, you're raised up at that western edge of Rayleigh, but the site is so distant and the lie of the land is such that actually probably whatever colour they are would matter fairly little, but it's the colour of them in that respect in terms of longer views. So you would see them potentially over the fence at those positions until the landscaping matured, possibly. And I think the reason for the choice of colour is that it's a sort of, they're natural sort of colours. I mean, if you members particularly wanted them to be a different colour, that's within your gift to request that, and we can change that condition.
Thank you, Katie. Again, I do remember on the site visit that they did say you can have any colour you want, including polka dot pink and whatever. So at the end of the day, I think it's our choice. But again, aesthetically, you've got to see where you're going to see them from. From the vineyard at Great Wheatley's, I do know you can see down into that field, and there is a footpath going down there. I think we've got to do the overall camouflaging, for want of a better word. I do extensive travelling around the country, and I do see these things all the time. And to be honest, if you paint them green, they do stand out more than other colours that they've been. But I will leave that for Katie to take that one forward. Councillor Stanley.
I'd like to put a motion forward that we should have the site two-tone green as a camouflage to make it blend in with the bushes and what have you, because they will not be there, not for at least 5 years. It will take 5 years before we see any greenery as big as what we're looking at as to the fencing, to make it invisible to the eye. And it's not only those people at the vineyard, it's people that run down in the train. They will look out and see exactly what it is. So with the trains going every 20 minutes, so we're told, it needs to be camouflaged.
Thank you,
I'd like
Councillor.
to put that recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. I think we've already said Katie's going to do something to put that forward regarding the colours. Is that not correct, Katie?
I think at the moment the condition is worded for two colours as described. I think if members want to change that, that's in their gift, but I think there's a motion been put forward for that condition to be amended.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that proposition.
Councillor Stanley, if you could repeat what the motion is, please.
Certainly, Chair. To change those colours to a two-tone green, so that it would camouflage as make it as possible to make it look like bushes rather than containers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Hello, we have a motion which has been seconded to vote on changing the colours from mahogany.
Sorry, Chair.
Thank you, members. Sorry, Nicola.
If members are concerned about the colours, because we don't have any evidence at the moment about whether camouflage green exists within the palette of colours available, then I would suggest that it would be better if we noted the committee's preference for camouflage green or two-tone green, but give the head of planning discretion to determine in the order of preference. So you have camouflage green or the other two colours that are available depending on what is considered to be most appropriate, because at the moment we know that these colours are available, but I don't know whether the two-tone green is something that exists. That
Okay.
would be my concern, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Nagla. Caroline, could you come in there, please, on what we...
The reason that's important is because otherwise the applicant would have to make a Section 73 application, which would seem rather onerous for changing the colour, which is why I would recommend that the discretion be given to officers to determine a suitable colour.
Caroline, sorry. Councillor Stanley, before we go forward, would you be happy with withdrawing your motion, and we'll just make a recommendation to the planning that they put that forward and look into a two-tone?
Thank you, Chair, but we was told on the site meeting that we could have whatever colour we decided to have. And if we want two-tone green, we can have. I didn't say it was camouflage. I said it would be better as camouflage, not camouflage green.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. What we're actually saying is, rather than putting a motion on it, if we leave it with the planning office, they will look and do their best to get close to what you're asking for.
Chair, can I make another suggestion, perhaps? Perhaps the applicant knows whether two-tone colour is available, so perhaps we can ask her if she knows, because that would give us some certainty. What I
Okay,
want to
thank you.
avoid is a need for a Section 73 application, because a colour like that doesn't exist.
Thank you, Ms Price.
Thank you, Chair. Off the top of my head, I can't say exactly what colours there are. My client may know, and I'll defer to him in a moment if you're happy for me to do so, Chair. The only other thing that I would say that could be done is the condition could require us to submit details in the same way as we would a type of brick or something.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stanley?
Do we take that on record, what the...
We do, as it's being recorded.
Thank you very much, and I agree with that then. Thank you.
So we're withdrawing that motion.
Yes, as it's been notified to me, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Councillor Mrs Shaw?
Thank you, Chairman. On page 6.30, 2.61, there, regarding the landscaping, could I actually ask, because it has been noted about the size of how long things will grow, that the applicant actually puts established shrubs and trees in instead of whips, so they obviously we will camouflage a lot quicker. Thank you. I don't know, Katie, if that's a condition or not. Thank you.
Okay.
Katie?
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, I was just trying to find the landscaping condition. So if you go to condition 17, page 6.8, we do specifically refer to the large stature trees to make sure that we do get some of those. But I think what you're referring to is other landscaping in terms of efforts being made for the native hedge to look as robust more quickly. I am not an ecologist, so I don't know whether planting like whips, if you like, would be preferable in any way in terms of establishment of the hedge, or larger specimens. But we could add something into that condition to that effect, if you like, to make sure that when we get the detailed landscaping in, that there is an effort made to, if you like, best endeavours to make the landscaping as robust as possible, including elements, not just the trees.
Thank you, Katie. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Katie. When you get whips from National Forest organisation, they say 1 in 10 whips actually die when they're being put in, because obviously this is a big scheme. It's not like a housing scheme that we've got contractors going around watering these plants. They'll be put in and they'll be obviously looking at the doing the batteries, etc. They won't be worried about the whips. So that's why I'd like to have it a bit more. I don't expect 15-foot trees going in, but more established. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
I think we can add something into that condition, but I'd also just add that some of the landscaping that's going to be provided on site, such as native hedgerows, is going to contribute to the on-site biodiversity net gain requirement for 10%. And there is a condition, I forget which number, which requires the developer to manage and monitor for 30 years, which means going and checking that the whips, if you like, are established and replanting where necessary, and there will be council involvement in ensuring that that is taking place as well. So that hopefully gives you some comfort that the landscaping here, we hope, will actually be established in the way that's anticipated.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Councillor Shaw. I think that was actually part of what your last statement was regarding the biodiversity and the upkeep of what was going on in respect to that. Thank you, Councillor Stanley, but I do believe we do have the answers to that.
Could I just mention, Chair, that in the development, they've turned around and said that they will put in mature trees. There will be some mature trees going in and some 2-year-old trees, not whips. The infill of the hedge will be by hedge plants, which will be hedge for natural bird nesting and such like. And they're quite common. They'll grow like anything in any case.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Katie will make a note of that and take that forward. All members have asked their questions, so I'll proceed to move a motion from the Chair. It is proposed that the committee resolves that planning permission be approved subject to the heads of terms of the S106 legal agreement and conditions sent out on pages 6.2 to 6.4 of this report. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Stuart Wilson. All those in favour, show of hands, please. That's unanimous. Thank you, members. Sorry, Miss Price, I was going to say, I was just checking on something, but thank you very much. Item 7, 24-00211, full 19 Lee Lots, Great Wakering, Essex. Mike Stranks will present the report.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is to a site of a semi-detached house located at the junction of Rushley, close with Lee Lots in Wakering. We'll see on a plan in a second, and which is in part of a wider residential area north of Wakering High Street. The proposal is to change the use of the existing dwelling to use class C2, still a residential use, but where care is provided. The application is described by the applicant as seeking to provide multiple occupancy for 5 unrelated adults with mental health diagnosis living independently as supported living accommodation. Residents are stated to be those with mild to moderate mental illness assessed by clinicians as able to live on their own with little support and being reintegrated back into the community. Staff would monitor residents' well-being to support re-enablement with activities of daily living, promoting independence and recovery while the residents await their own accommodation. Staff would provide monitoring and support such as prompting any medication, help attending appointments if required, support access to paid or unpaid work, and daily living such as shopping, cooking and cleaning. There would be 2 members of staff during the day and 1 member of staff overnight. The necessary changes to the building, if we could jump to Plan 3 please, the revised floor plan, are all internal and would end up with 4 upstairs and 1 downstairs bedroom, with 1 upstairs staff visitor room and 1 ground floor staff room. The ground floor bedroom would have an ensuite. There would be 1 downstairs and 1 upstairs bathroom and an upstairs shower room in addition. Members will recall that this application was deferred at the meeting of the 27th of June last year to allow officers to go back to the applicant and other agencies to try and seek clarification of a number of issues raised. Now, in terms of the nature of the business, members will understand that the residents would be referred into the service by designated staff in social services, some councils perhaps, or other commissioning bodies, as well as people responsible for residents themselves. Residents would typically reside for between 6 months and 2 years. The referring agency would be responsible for assessing the suitability of these premises for the residents. In terms of safeguarding, members will see at paragraph S2.1 of the supplementary report that the provision of 2 members of staff and 1 overnight member of staff would actually be double that required to meet the Essex County Council Mental Health Supported Accommodation Pathway Guide to mental health placements from dated April 23. Staff would be qualified to care certification and the service manager would be responsible for the day-to-day running supervision of staff and residents. Now, in parking terms, members raised questions about that last time. Actually, since the application was before committee, there have been recently adopted revised parking standards, which is explained in the report, but in summary, you'll see at paragraph S32 to the report, the proposal will now only require a minimum of 3 spaces. Last time we was talking about the need potentially for 4. The revised standard brings it down slightly, but nevertheless the applicant has responded. If we can look at the parking plan, I think that's it should be plan 4. You'll see that the issue previously was to put 4 spaces on the front of Lee lots. There was concern about the harshness of that parking arrangement. The applicant has been able to, as you can see on the plan, get an access or provide an access on the plan off Rushley Close, which frees up part of that frontage indicated in green there to be retained for some form of landscaping, and in such that the car parking required wouldn't dominate the whole of the Lee Lots frontage. So on this basis, the scheme now before you exceeds the minimum requirement of your current parking standards. In terms of the internal layout and technical standards, members will see at paragraph S41 of the supplementary report that the number of bedrooms would meet the standard required by Southend City Council with the addition of an ensuite and separate shower room. The applicant has advised that for potential residents with significant disability needs, it would go back to this idea of the commissioning authority or the residents' carers checking out these premises as to whether they will be suitable or not for the future resident. So it's like when you choose other types of accommodation, if it's not suitable for whatever reasons, they wouldn't place, whereas if it is suitable, then there'd be the opportunity to place. Officers have not been able to establish any increased link to burglaries associated with the use that came up last time when members were concerned about the presence of medication. The supervision and management of any fire alarms and noise would be the same, really, to that of any household within the neighbouring C3 uses. The Council's core strategy policy H5 for dwelling type states that new developments must contain a mix of dwellings to ensure they cater for people within the community, whatever their housing needs. The proposed change of use here from C3 dwelling to C2 assisted living would result in an alternative dwelling type which would help meet the needs of people with learning disabilities or other mental health needs. And that accords more generally with paragraph 63 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which requires local planning authorities to deliver a supply of sufficient homes for varying housing needs, including homes for people with disabilities. Members will see that reproduced at Appendix 1 to this report is a recently allowed appeal decision in respect of a closely comparable in officer's view example for a detached 3-bedroom C2 use at the site of 365 Little Wakering Road within the same settlement and against the same policy policy considerations that in officers' view is now a further material consideration in favour of granting permission for the proposal. It is for members to give whatever weight they see fit in respect of this decision, because each application before you has to be considered on individual merit. But there is also an expected consistency in decision making. And what you have here with this appeal decision is a decision for something closely comparable, but from the higher authority, which is the Secretary of State for the country. So officers feel it is a material consideration for you to take into account. The weight that you give it is down for members in the debate. On the addendum, members will see that there's a number of further representations and a completed equalities assessment. The recommendation is approval, subject to the revised conditions you'll see in your report, set out at the beginning of the supplementary report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. We have one public speaker for this item, Mr. Sam Tarbuck. Would like to speak against the application. Thank you, Mr. Tarbuck. Are you okay with how the mic works? Thank you. You have 5 minutes to make your speech.
Okay. That's quite loud. There are many things that a lot of us would say about this application, and to be honest, I could try and go through point by point and pull out challenges and make references to the current neighbourhood policy. For example, where you've just made a reference for the need to accommodate dwellings for disability, but yet you conflict yourself by saying people with disability will not use this facility. I could also highlight the mistakes that we believe have been made throughout the planning application process, but I feel I should instead focus on the important issues at hand. I want to give you a flavour of how this is already impacting the community. This is already causing a tremendous amount of anxiety and distress. It has already taken its toll on the residents' emotional well-being. We've all suffered uninjured stress and discomfort, knowing that potentially we are faced with a decision that is largely out of our hands, but one that's going to potentially impact us for many years to come. In the committee report, section S3.4, all the way through to section OM.7, there are examples of inaccurate information, lies and fiction. For example, the inspector advising there is spillover parking in the care home opposite. What care home? There isn't one. The risk to the school children, given the school is some way away and the risk is limited. The school is at the end of the road, less than 90 seconds walk, with children walking to and from school, some being unattended. An assumption has been made in the report that children would be normally accompanied by parents, but yet when we make objections regarding visitors and the potential for antisocial behaviour, we're told that it's not factual and is merely an assumption, so shouldn't be taken into consideration. Then we talk about bathroom facilities being shared between the residents. Well, what about the staff? What about access for them that are staying on the site? You also say mild to moderate mental health conditions, but yet in the application it's previously been described as moderate to severe. They have very different definitions. We also do not believe that this will be a home that is under regulation. Look, let me tell you some facts and home truths in my opinion as a neighbour that lives opposite the proposed premises. It's a fact that there's an issue not just in the village, but in particular down our road in Lee Lots when it comes to parking. We as residents can barely manoeuvre our vehicles at times, especially during the week because of school drop-offs and pick-ups, and when the school have events such as parents' evenings and assemblies. The school also facilitates football at the weekends of both Saturdays and Sundays, and it sees 6 to 8 teams that have training and who play their matches. If you take the children just in those teams, and the parents, referees and coaches, you're looking at circa 200 people that are coming and going and looking for somewhere to park. And guess where they park? Lee Lots. In reality, this means that it means mounting curbs, parking on the pavement, and sometimes in the middle of the road. To think that this rehab institution will not add to what is already a growing problem is frankly absurd. You'll have 5 recovering adults. They're not children. They're likely to own a car themselves. Then you have the staff, as well as external health and social care professionals that will be required to visit the property. Not all conditions are treatable and can be monitored remotely. You've even said it yourself today, that the premises will need to be visited by multiple people to check that they are suitable for those that are going to be staying there. On top of that, Do you really think the 5 residents are not going to have their own family and friends come and visit? Where are they going to be parked? So let's be real. 3 or 4 planned spaces at the property, it's not going to cut it. Let's not forget about the deliveries as well. The drugs, the medical supplies, cleaning supplies, as well as the ongoing maintenance that will undoubtedly be regularly required. This cannot and should not be compared to a normal family shopping online awaiting a Royal Mail delivery, as it has been positioned in the committee planning report. Then I must point out the fact that these houses were built for families. They were not designed to cater for rehabilitation services. There's no car park, no adaptations, no soundproofing material. In the report, it says the noise is expected to be coming from staff coming and going, and it shouldn't be causing a problem. But what about those patients that are suffering from mental health issues that are, as previously described, moderate to severe? The patients potentially screaming at the top of their voices in the property. We live in a small village where you can hear a pin drop at night. It's not fair on the locals to have to be put in this position where we'll be disturbed. I also do not think it's appropriate to pass the buck and simply say that the Environmental Health Service will handle such queries. Why is the problem not being addressed now and prevented? Even better still, why not find a more suitable location? It has been said that a single alarm needs to be installed. What about panic alarms? This is a great concern for us as residents. What happens in the middle of the night if the resident has an episode where they grab a knife and threaten a member of staff, or there's various other examples that I could give. The community is made up of both young families and the elderly. The risk of antisocial behaviour and the impact on the children, not just those who attend Great Wakeham Primary Academy, but also those that leave the house at 6 a.m. in the morning to walk to get their morning bus to go to the King Edward School. I would urge you to remember that the rehab centre should fit in with the community and serve the local people. We shouldn't have to accommodate or make adjustments to absorb this facility. In this instance, there's not been sufficient consultation, in my opinion, with the community. The documents produced for the committee do not contain the correct facts, and when it comes to the number of representations that have been raised, the document says that there's been 6 to date, yet we know there's been a hell of a lot more. Mine's even missing. The school has not been consulted, and neither has the local police. We have a lack of amenities in the area, low police presence, and no police station. Overcrowded doctors and overwhelmed doctors as well as a lack of jobs in the area. So how on earth is it a good idea to put yet more strain on a fractured infrastructure? More to the point, how are you going to rehabilitate and support mentally ill recovering addicts and help them integrate into society and find a job? It's Great Wakering. Look, I'm all for helping people and giving people a chance. As a person who's also had their struggles with mental health, I understand the needs for services that support people to getting back to their best. But this proposal is just not fit for purpose. The applicants have no track record or experience in rehabilitation. They have picked a location that's not appropriate to conduct a test and learn experiment at our expense. Check Companies House and do some background checks on the individuals, and you'll see for yourself.
Mr. Tarbert, I've allowed you to go over to 8 minutes. You were saying about the feeling of yourself and the residents, which are allowed now going into an area which we shouldn't really be going into. So thank you very much for what you've said so far. Okay. If you'd like to resume your seat. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tarbert. Order of speakers, ward members to take priority. We have councillors FD, Myers and McPherson. 1 second, please. Councillor FD.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. Members, I see that 19 new lots is recommended for approval. The fundamental issues have still not changed. Essex County Council finally visited the site and have recommended a drop curb in Rushley Close. As parking conditions, Longley lots suffer from with congestion. The proximity to the local school has moved from 250 metres to 160 metres, which is about a 1.5 minute walk, which was misleading in the initial officer report. The information supplied by the applicant states that the residents will be residents will be recovering from mental health issues. In my opinion, this residency is too close to the local school, with the officer citing the recent appeal decision of 365 Little Wakering Road. I personally feel this is outrageous and should have been redacted from this application, as the appeals decision is in a different parish with different circumstances and should not have been cited as a material planning reason for the approval. Appeals decisions should never be taken into consideration by committee members when deciding on planning permission, as every planning application is unique and should be judged on its own merits. I urge this committee to reject the application on parking, the proximity to the local school and the change of use to a residential institution, or more accurately, a halfway house, should not be situated in a residential cul-de-sac. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Efty. Councillor Murphy-Gerson.
Thank you, Chairman. It was myself who brought this item to committee back in June. Both my ward colleagues had concerns on the material grounds of how this will impact on our residents, citing noise and parking. I'm afraid, members, I can't see that anything's changed. At that time, I presented on the screen many photos for members to see the problems this road currently experiences. I do not think that and please do not think that that experience of parking is just at school time, and I'm talking to the officers here. It's all the time. The school runs after school clubs. At the weekends, they have cricket, they have football, they have netball. They've got a climbing wall. And when they're not doing that, they have social evenings there, PTA evenings, fairs. The parking there is an issue all the time. So please don't think it's just on school runs, because it isn't. In the report, it cites that it's 0.25 kilometres or something away from the school. Absolute rubbish. Okay, we go down there and we'll pace it out if we have to. It's probably about 0.15. It is, as pointed out by my colleague, at the end of the close. Can I refer to page 7.13, and it's Highways report. And this is where they include that measurement. Whatever distance, the fact is, people park along this road. They park along it with little people. They're quite short children. It's already a dangerous road. So don't think for one moment that it's not going to get more dangerous with this. I'll then turn to page 7.7. And as pointed out, the officer has included a separate recent application. I've only been a councillor since 2009, and I can say I don't think I've ever seen another example included within an application for members to consider alongside it. In fact, I can remember in training, unless somebody wants to point out that I'm wrong, that every planning case was always under the assumption that it will be considered on its own merit, separate to other similar cases. So let's just look at the similarities between this one and the one that's cited in the report. Parking. That's it. That's a similarity. Both had parking issues. The rest of it is completely different. The site that is included for you to have a look at is on a road that backs on, and the facility backs onto fields. It already had a facility next to it, so it was almost an extension, let's say, of the existing one. The site that is in front of you is in the middle of a residential area. It is surrounded by family homes. Now, if we do want to go back to the other site and look at that, I know one other colleague who lives in the same road as I do, and we have numerous increased ambulances and police cars going past at all hours, and that will happen. Not only is there another not similarity between the other case that's in there, as pointed out, the proximity of the school. I'm sorry, it's a high risk. Even if these people, you've got in here, under safeguarding, which the officer quoted first of all, 1.5, which makes me giggle a little bit because how are you going to have half a person, but one person there at night. So when we're talking about safeguarding, and bearing in mind this is surrounded by family homes with young children, if one of those people should, because it says in there, it's quite possible have a relapse, and they go out, what's that carer doing? Is the carer going to go with them or stay in the house? Because there's one of them. Okay, let's have a think. So the proposal is to choose, on page 7.11, point 3 says the proposal is to change the use of the property from C3 dwelling, which, and it's got in italics, conventional dwelling. It says itself, it's a conventional dwelling in a conventional road, in a conventional cul-de-sac, in a conventional village. Look at the position of it. It's surrounded by family homes. Think of 6 complete strangers in a house, and do you think there's going to be noise? It's a family neighbourhood, so don't tell me this isn't going to impact on them. Again, looking at the proximity of the school and the parking problems, think little people running around already, you're going to get more traffic. Refer again to page 7.13.11. First sentence from Essex County Highway says, the use would not be likely to generate significant amounts of traffic. Now, if Essex County Council are that adamant and that convinced, then why don't they define their sentence and say it will not? Because they can't. They've said it will not likely, which to me means they've got their doubts already. This will cause an impact, not just on parking, but to the residents. And I'm sorry, it's in the wrong place for C2 use. It's simple. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. As I said, due to the emotive nature, I am allowing things to go on a little more over the top than what they should do. Councillor Myers? Again, I'll say if you're speaking as a ward member or as a committee member.
Thank you, Chairman. I shall be speaking as a committee member.
Okay, I'll come back to you then.
Right, thank you.
Committee members wishing to speak. I'll actually come straight back to you, Councillor Myers.
Well, after Mrs. McPherson's very eloquent speech, I would much the same things. Firstly, the Essex County Council have suggested putting more drop curbs in, which is just going to make less space for the cars to park in anyway. So they might well happily not have an extra space in this particular premises, but everybody else has got to move their cars further away because there's some more places they can't park. The noise, etc. But the main concern with this place is the parking. It is absolutely horrendous down there. At times you can't even get a car through the gaps. It is probably the biggest problem this place will ever have is the parking. And I must also confer with Mrs. McPherson that the fact that we've got a comparison to 341 Little Wakering Road in this report, when in our initial training, I'm sure I was told that every case should be looked at on its own merits. And this, if we take the comparison in there, if someone decides to put a brothel at one end of the street, does that mean we can never complain about the rest of the brothels that are going in next to it? It's a ridiculous argument. Just because another care home has been put somewhere else in Wakering, why on earth should it just be allowed anywhere else it wants to go in Wakering? But as I say, biggest problem is the parking. It is absolutely horrendous down there. And it's, as I say, it's not school times. It's all the time. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chair. As you very well know, today's family not only holds mother and father, it holds their next of kin. And sometimes those families will go into 5 or 6 people, and you'll have 4 or 5 cars. You can either A, put a permit of restriction for parking in that road and put yellow lines in as well, or you can let people park, because the home will only have 2 parking spaces, but the home could have 5 cars. So where are you going to put the other 3? In somebody's front garden? No, you can't do that. So you can only restrict it, and the only people that can restrict those parking things is the highway, not us. That isn't coming, that can't possibly meet our requirements as planning authority. It's down to Essex County Council or the parking people. As for the property itself, there are some items there which don't equate to me, is that there is no toilet facilities for the staff. There's only toilet facilities for the residents, which is one. The second thing that I'm concerned with is the one person of a night. Now, if trouble does start, you really do need to have 2 at all times, so that one can deal with the situation and the other one could deal with something else that may be occurring. So those are the 2 problems that I've got with this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Mike, can you come back on that?
I think the only one that's sort of factual, Chairman, is the staff. I think somewhere in the report, I've lost my place now, but I think said that what the case officer tried to do was to shop around, if you like, around various agencies, partly why it took so long, plus the guy's only part-time as well, but trying to get standards off other agencies, because obviously none of this is in planning. And he was able to pick up he approached Southend, and they was able to give him their standard for accommodation. And I say in the report, I think, or in my presentation, that the level of staff provision in this, 2 in the day and 1 in the night, is actually double. You could have 10 persons at that same staff numbers. So in effect, with only 5 persons in this unit, you've got double the ratio that could be acceptable to the licenses agencies of the number of staff. Now, it's for members to decide the planning merits of this and the decision, but I don't think we can help you anymore with the staff in provision. That's done by other agencies elsewhere. Okay, so to try and say, well, if you'd like how many staff present, might be, I mean, Ms Stevens may come in on this, but it may be deemed an unreasonable condition. What the case officer has been able to find for you is a standard that you could, if you like, fall back on, which is the Southend standard, which they've said for 2 in the day and 1 at night, you could have double the number of persons. You probably wouldn't fit them in this unit, but your staffing ratio, if that's the route you're going down, that there's inadequate staffing, that standard would likely be brought back to you as a defence. And I say we've made that point, I think, in the report.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chair. It wasn't for the fact of the residents, it was for the fact that they would have visitors in the evening, because when people work, they come home, they'll have tea or whatever, and they may want to go and visit one of the residents or all of the residents. So not only would you have 4 residents or 5 residents, you would have the company.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. I think we're fully aware in respect to the parking element. There's already an issue regarding parking.
What are we talking about in the way of facilities, toilet facilities,
Yeah,
staff.
we'll have that as well. I was actually going to refer that to Nagler.
Sorry, Chair, what exactly did you want me to address?
It's in respect of the nighttime care and the toilet facilities for the staff.
What we're concerned about here is what you need to remember, members, please, is that this is a planning matter. So what you're deciding is in land use term, whether a conversion from C3 to C2, the use class, to a residential care facility is appropriate in that location. Officers have advised you that in land use term it's appropriate. Who occupies the care home and how it's managed is not a relevant planning consideration. So I would ask members to be mindful that they don't stray into areas that as a matter of law you cannot take into account. Now, parking is a relevant material planning consideration, and what officers have advised you that in their professional opinion, the impact of a development of this kind on parking is insignificant, essentially. That is what the Highway Authority tells you, and that's what the officers tell you, and that is why they probably included the reference to the appeal decision. And I'll pick up on treating each case on its own merits. That is absolutely correct, but appeal decisions and the way an inspector and the Secretary of State have approached their decision making are a relevant material consideration. And what officers, I think, were trying to tell you is a very similar case, leaving aside where the facility is, because this is just a change of use. In another case, has been lost on appeal. And so essentially, our duty as your advisors is to let you know that there's a risk that you may have a costs award against you if you decide on parking grounds to refuse this application, because the impact from a residential property, for example, if you've got 4 adults in a large dwelling like that living there, they might have 4 cars. There's no difference, so you're assessing what is there now as to what could happen. And I take your point, Councillor, that there may be visitors, but that's really no difference to if friends and family visit someone. So that is the difficulty and what officers were trying to explain to you. And your duty is essentially to assess a land use term. However many carers are on the site at night or during the day is not a relevant material planning consideration. That is something for the regulator. They will have to have a license, etc., etc. That is not for us to decide. For you to decide tonight.
Thank you, Nagler. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just quickly ask if the officers, I know Councillor McPherson referred to the fact that she had supplied some pictures, I think, on a previous occasion. Would you happen to have those and be able to put one of those up of the actual road itself? I'd be grateful. Whilst you're doing that, I will pick up on this point of the inspector's report on the other site. My understanding of all the trailing is each individual planning application does not set a precedent for another application. So I stand by that. And the question I would ask is how far away does that other site have to be not to be relevant? So, for example, if there was a similar site in Rochford Town, should that be taken into account? Or perhaps in Shoebury? Well, that's not in our area, but it's just as close. The distance between the existing one and Shoebury, as the crow flies, is the same distance. So I would perhaps challenge that particular issue. With regards to the road itself is a very difficult road. You've heard all about the parking. Yes, okay. You can see there that the road was never designed to take the amount of traffic and road parking that you can see in Lee lots. They're parking on the pavement, parking on the grass verge. The grass verge are tuned to yellow lines, everything. There has been cases that I've had to deal with in a couple of years ago. There was a fire engine had to go down Lee lots, couldn't get through. What happens with an ambulance? They wouldn't get through under the current parking situation. The school is just up the road, and as has been mentioned a number of times about the school parking and also the use around the sports facilities, etc., etc. I'll pick up, it was touched on by another councillor with regards to the new parking bay that has been installed. Okay, that's a step in the right direction, but the bellmouth of that parking space has now lost a parking site. So, you know, it's as broad as it's long, isn't it? So it makes it very, very difficult. The site is simply at the end of a cul-de-sac. It's just in the wrong place. There are many other sites within the area that would be far more suitable for this. It's just that this particular building, somebody's bought it and thought, oh, what can I do with it? Let's do that. So I'm afraid I can't support the application as it is. It isn't right. It is causing a great deal of mental stress. We talk about the mental well-being of the patients in there. What about the mental stress of those people living in the road that have got to live with this? That doesn't seem to come into account. So again, I don't think that is right, that should be the case. There will be people visiting the site. If you've got a house of multiple occupancy, there's going to be more visitors. Yes, if you've got a family living in a house such as that, mum, dad, perhaps a couple of kids, maybe 3 or 4. But you wouldn't have the same number of visitors if you turn this into a multiple occupancy. You'll have a patient in there, mum, dad come along, brother and sister, all on the same day. If you've got 4 or 5, think of the number of vehicles that produces. So it does need to be considered, and perhaps I shouldn't, but I strongly disagree with the assessment that Essex County Council has made on this. And it is going to be extremely difficult. That road is very narrow. It's not designed for the amount of traffic and the vehicles that it's having to deal with, and that is only going to get worse. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. I'll just refer to the appeal decision which Mike Stranks brought forward, and he was very clearly stated that we were to only take it for a point of reference, and it's up to us what weight we put on that report. But I will just ask him again, just to clarify, was it a geographical report, or, as Councillor Steptoe said, is there similar cases in Southend, etc.?
Chairman, we're not always aware of what goes on in neighbouring authorities. It's the fact that this one, if you like, was on our watch and very recent. In terms of the location, the member is right. If this had been in Rayleigh and different street types, maybe it'd have less weight, less relevance. I think the point was taken earlier that it's in a different parish, but from a geographic point of view, it's in Little Wakerin Road. Members familiar with that location will know it's in the Wakerin area. What we have here is a similar case, similar use, albeit next door to a bigger use. So as I think Ms Stevens said earlier on, it's like an annex to the existing use. But it's in the same kind of policy era. Yeah, it's a recent decision by an inspector, literally something like a month ago. And it's in the similar location. It's in the Great Wakerin area. It's in Little Wakerin Road. And it raises similar issues to what members have been thinking about over the last 6 months. So from officers' point of view, it's a material consideration. Had that inspector dismissed the appeal and refused the permission, it's quite possible officers would have changed their recommendation. In officers' view, it's that significant. Now, what he's done in this case, he's dismissed the appeal. He's allowed the appeal, forgive me, and granted planning permission. This committee refused permission. It was challenged by the applicant, as is their right, and the applicant has won. So the inspector recently has granted permission. And that's worth not only us knowing as officers, it's in the district, it's part of the same policies that you and I work with, but it's also relevant because it's very recent. So it's under the same kind of policy things. The new National Planning Policy Framework, not that it really addresses these issues. So it's a material consideration, as you heard Ms Stevens mention earlier on. What weight you give it is down to yourselves as decision makers. You may choose, as some people have spoken and said, well, I think there's more differences than there are comparison. But in officers' view, comparisons were close enough. It's not only worth including in the weighing up that officers have done for you, but it's worth you actually having the decision in the paperwork so that you can read it alongside and not have to have computers up and other sites and read it before you get here and everything else. So in the interest of efficiency, we included the decision. You are right that applications should be decided on merit, but as I said, you also have to have regard to similarity, similar decisions, consistency in decision making, and as Ms Stevens has said, it's in planning, it's a material consideration, something for you to take into account. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. I will reiterate that that we are here to members to determine on a material planning consideration, but we are having a very open and extensive debate on this. 1 second, please. Sorry, Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, the site that the inspector looked at is in a different parish. It's actually in Barling. It is not in Great Wakering, just to qualify that. It is, as the crows flies, it's not any closer than Shoebury Nesses. So I don't understand why that comes to be. The road that site is in is not a cul-de-sac. It's a road that goes through Barling and out the other side. It isn't a cul-de-sac. So I don't see how there is a similarity. It isn't similar.
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. I think what we're doing is just showing a similar property, not location, in respect of what has been granted on appeal. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually don't live in Wakering, but I do know this road. When it came forward before, my concerns were that they should have alarms going into emergency services. This hasn't been addressed. Well, my biggest concern is the parking. This hasn't been addressed. It has been addressed for that property, but not for the residents of that road. And as it's been pointed out by Councillor McPherson's photographs, and other members here, the parking is atrocious, and I'm sorry, I will not be supporting this application.
Thank you. I'll come back to you on the alarm, but I will move on to Councillor Knight.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking from personal experience, back in 2020, when we was all in lockdown, I took a job as a carer looking after vulnerable adults with learning difficulties, and I went to various different homes to look after them. And in each home, one in Rayleigh, one in Ashington, one in Rochford, various houses, each home had a staff toilet. So we did not use the residents' toilets. We also had, depending on the level of care needed, one member of staff per one resident. And there was one person overnight if they was only mild. If there was more severe, you had to have a minimum of 2 for safeguarding reasons. I know that's not a planning consideration, but going back to the parking, I've sometimes had to park nearly a mile away to get to the home on time to relieve the previous carer. So parking is an issue, and you're saying that you've got one member of staff or two members of staff during the day. I don't think it's enough, and it's in the report. And there's no staff toilet or showers facilities. So that's all I've got to say, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knight. Councillor Eaves.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I wonder if I could ask Mike, please. Parking standards, is there a difference between commercial and residential?
Chair, the standards are broken down into the residential uses. So residential is hotels like that, C1, care homes, C2, residential dwellings, C3. Your commercial is a wide band of B&E uses, and they're broken down. Generally, the industrial ones are like 1 every 25 square metres, something like that. So there is a difference between the commercials, but it's based on the use classes order. So if you're thinking, well, this is a residential use, but it's run as a business, therefore it's commercial. In planning terms, it's a residential use because people are living there, albeit temporarily for whatever period of time. So because the use is one of the Cs, then the residential standards would apply.
Okay, thank you. Then going on from that, are you aware, through you, Chair, when Essex Highways produced their report, did they do that as a desktop exercise or did they do a site visit?
My understanding, Chair, is that they do site visits like we do for applications, but not having been in attendance with it, I can't give you an absolute guarantee that it was visited, but it's usually expected that they do.
It just strikes me that if you do this as a desktop exercise, it's very understandable how they've come to the conclusion that they've come to. But I would suggest that in this particular case, that they should be, we should be looking for a deferment for them to do a site visit to see the concerns firsthand that we have. If this is a safety issue, then I would think that is surely something that should be considered. There is just one more thing, which was just the issue of the property being semi-detached. I remember when this first came up, that was an issue that was raised, and I don't see any mitigation on the party wall to mitigate the disturbance that the adjoined neighbours are inevitably going to get.
Thank you, Councillor Eaves. Councillor Myers.
Only a very quick question, really, for my own clarification. I appreciate the fact that lots of information has to go into this report, but why is it full of stuff that we can't act on? I mean, if we can't act on the fact that the amount of people that are caring for the people overnight is not something we can even consider, why is it in the report?
Mr. Stranks.
Chairman, it was, you recall, hopefully, back in June, members had a number of issues, prompted a lot by what residents were saying, and officers felt that, they'd go away. I think your instructions to us was, go away and seek clarification and get better detail in the report. It's taken some time because, talk to social services and people like that, they're not used to dealing with this kind of thing at this level. But we've done our best to get clarification on what we could. I don't think we could find out everything you'd asked us for. So it was in response to the questions that members raised themselves. But you may be right in thinking, well, hang on a minute, we've gone off down a rabbit hole of largely non-planning related things, talking about numbers of bathrooms and things like this, which, yes, you have those kind of standards for your residential dwellings, but you don't have anything like that for care homes. If while I'm in chair, just picking up on the absence of, I think, soundproofing, since the last report, we've had a look at a lot of the conditions that were there, and officers didn't consider, given that it was a residential use, that it was something, the soundproofing was a justifiable condition. So we've declined to carry that through to you now. It's been dropped.
Can I have my answer to my question around Essex Highways?
I'm just getting to that. I'll take Councillor Constable first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After listening to all the other members here, I've not heard any member in favour of this application. I would therefore like to move a motion that this application is rejected, that it is not a suitable property to be moved from a C3 use to a C2 use on the basis that has been mentioned by nearly every member here, including parking and all other options. Thank you.
Chairman, I'll second that.
Can I just ask a question of somebody who may know regarding the highways? Is there not a tick box to say whether it's desktop or actual? Sorry, Councillor. Yes, actually. Councillor Shaw, I do apologise.
Thank you. I'd like it on record. What was your question?
Is there not a tick box where it's actually a desktop or a site visit for when you actually do the
When they
reports?
do, because I've always moaned at this committee, when they have the letters come in from Essex Highways, I've always asked them to be published, not just the précis of them. And this never happens. Not all applications get site visits. So I've been down there as a deputy for highways. I cannot say if an inspector has been down there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I do apologise, Councillor Shaw.
Thank you.
We've actually got a... Well, bear with me 1 second, please. Councillor Constable, can you actually repeat your motion, please, and on what basis?
Mr. Chairman, I'll have a go at getting the exact wording right, but the application is not suitable for change of use
Members, please.
from a C3 to a C2 use, as the location of the property is not suitable. The fact that it is in a small residential area is not suitable, and parking isn't suitable. And if any other members have got anything they would like to add to that, then you can ask them for anything to add. But emergency access is another one. It's just not a suitable location for this sort of property. As been said, it is a residential property in a small residential close, and it says there that C3 uses are used as a hospital or a nursing home, and it's a residential area. It's just not suitable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Constable. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to second the proposition there. What I was going to say was that as County Councillor, we do get a letter when they have assessed a particular application, and that does give us an indication as to whether it's desktop or just a visit. And on this particular occasion, I received a letter, and there's no indication whatsoever to say that it was a visited site.
Excellent. Once again, I do apologise, Councillor Shaw. I was having a senior moment then. But thank you for your clarification. Right, we have a motion in front of us which has been seconded, but bear with me a second, please.
Chairman, my shorthand isn't like it should be. I mean, hopefully we've got the value these days of the recording, but what with the reason, when you come to defend a reason, sorry. Yeah, I'll say it.
Mike, if you could get closer.
Chairman, my shorthand isn't what it should be to keep up with you, but we've got the luxury of the recording, so we can go back and replay that. But when you have a reason, what you need essentially is the flesh to be able to defend. You've given us, if you like, the skeleton. You're saying it's inappropriate, it's not suitable, is the words you've used, which is okay. An inspector would say, right, that's fine, it's not suitable. Why is it not suitable? And you've cited the debate, you've said about, oh, we're inadequate parking, it's in a residential street, a cul-de-sac, we can pick up on some of those things. But the more meat that you can put on why it's not suitable, the more success you would have on appeal. I don't know if Ms Stevens can elaborate better than I can on that, but what we're ideally looking for, we can only use in the defence what you give us now. So if you give us a bare bones reason, that's not as good as if you give us a fully fleshed reason. So we want as much meat, if you don't mind, on it as you can put to give this the better, more robust defence.
Thank you, Councillor Constable.
Yep, thank you, Mike. The bare bone, yes, I gave you the bare bones. I also said if any other members would like to add to any of the reasons, then that's for them to add to the reasons. But it is just unsuitable for a small residential close that is adjacent to a school that is purely a residential close. It's not been built or made to take any sort of residential home of any description. Even if you said it was a care home, it's not a suitable location for that sort of environment or that sort of a building. Taking out the people that is using it, whatever it was going to be other than a C3 use, a C2 use or whatever it is, it's not suitable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Councillor Constable. What I will do is when you've conferred, I'll come back to you. Councillor Stanley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would like the officer to put the description is from a C3 to a C2 so that we would all understand what that conditions, what those terminations are, and that's what we're dealing with at the moment. It's not a question of I'm sure it's not a question of parking in the road or whatever that may be. As it's been described to me, we are taking this as from C3 to C2. So could somebody explain that then, please?
Yeah, I'm going to take a few questions first, Mike. Councillor Squires-Coleman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I just refer back to Councillor Eves' suggestion of a deferment? I just feel or wonder if the officers can help.
Councillor Squires-Coleman, we have got a motion on the table.
But can I just say that it wasn't addressed, Councillor Eves?
Well, that's why I clarified in respect the deferment was down to the Essex County Council highways to actually make a site visit, but I understand a letter has already been sent out to the Essex County Councillors in respect of that, hence why I refer to Councillor Shaw and Councillor Steptoe. I'm going to come, before I bring Mike Stranks in, I'm going to come back to Councillor Constable. You were conferring, have you got any more meat to put on that bone?
I think some of my colleagues have got points they'd like to add to that, if that is acceptable, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Stanley. Councillor Stanley, I will come back to you in a minute with regarding your question. I will link up my brain in a minute. Councillor Steptoe.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I was going to suggest to Councillor Constable that we put on a comment about school parking. It is a place where it's one of the only places that people can park to pick up the kids from school, and the school kids are walking up and down that road quite considerably. So school parking, I think, is an issue that needs to be considered.
Thank you. I think the parking overall, whether it be literally for the school, whether it be for the residents, or whether it be for any other occasion, is a problem which we need to see. Can we, Mike, just answer Councillor Stanley's question now, please?
Yeah, Chairman. Uses in planning are grouped into classes. Think of them a bit like leagues, like in football, Premier League, Championship, First Division, etc. So all your shop retail uses are classes A and now E. Your industrial uses are E and B. Your residential uses are C, and then sometimes you get some specials. So C is then further subdivided into C1, C2 and C3. And C1 is your hotels. Yeah. C2 is a residential use, but where care is provided, a degree of care. Yeah, distinct from strict medical. Hospitals was mentioned, which is separate, but care homes and degree of care, where you're living, it's your home, like a nursing home, but you're receiving care of some sort. These people in this application, it would be their residence, but they would have on-site care provision, and that care, we understand from the application particulars, is tailored to the individual. One person may need, if you like, a very light touch, just supervision to budget and to help go shopping and get themselves back on their feet so they can live alone again or in a home by themselves with no support. They don't need it. There'd be others that might be recovering from a nervous breakdown or something, and that would take longer. Yeah. So each individual may be on a different care package. C3 is your residential use. So people in this facility, we understand, might go from being in a C2 to living in a flat or a dwelling somewhere where that would be the C3 use. So the C3 is a family home where there is no care required. Yeah? C2 is a home of somebody, but where part of the living provides care. And there's distinctions in planning around that, primarily around car parking, if that helps, Chair.
Thank you. At this moment in time, I'm going to request that Caroline, if you could come in regarding material planning consideration, because I think at the moment we've only got parking.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. So the reason that has been spelt out so far is that there's parking. Taking that first, so are you saying that there's insufficient provision off-street, on-site provision for parking? Because the existing situation, as you've outlined, as the committee has outlined, and as we know, is already pretty dire. So the point is are you trying to say that this will make that dire situation significantly? There's a tipping point. So this situation will make that will tip that point where it's even more. Okay, so the provision on site, the 4 spaces that they're providing on site, is insufficient as well?
Yeah, you say they've got 4 on site, but they're losing 1 off-road, on-road parking. So they're not gaining any parking. They're in fact, it's an equalisation of the parking, because where people would have parked next to their back garden, they're losing that parking space. So they're losing an on-street parking space to gain an off-street parking space. So the situation for parking in the area is actually going to either be the same or worse. It's going to be worse for people looking to park in the street, because you're losing an on-street parking space to gain an off-street parking space. So in my opinion, and I think from the opinion around this room, you're making it a worse situation for people parking, i.e. for the school and for associated stuff that's going on within the school.
Sorry, does the school actually have a direct reference, or is it just parking is it displacement of park? Because I think we're starting to mix the issues up. If there's an already a situation with on-street parking which is difficult and it has some level of harm, I think what you need to try and demonstrate to an inspector is how is this going to then tip that balance even more, because you're removing an on-street parking space by a drop curb.
Yeah, basically what you're saying. It is making the parking worse.
Okay, I think from an officer's point of view, would say that's probably quite a difficult reason to defend if you're saying that the situation, because what you're trying to get to is that this, by allowing this proposal, will make it so it's already really bad on street. This proposal will make it so bad that actually you're going to jam the whole highway network. Is that what?
If
that's what you. Yeah.
Highway in that area, and it would cause the parking to be severe and dire.
Okay. Okay. So a loss
Thank
of
you. What Caroline's trying to say is we don't want to dilute the point they were actually trying to make.
Okay, so a
and
lot
by
of
bringing something else into it will do that. So sorry, Caroline.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. So loss of an on-street parking space by the drop curb. Equally, I think you need to understand that a drop curb does not actually guarantee and it doesn't actually prevent people from parking in front of that drop curb. Anyway, that's an aside, but we can take that. And then the other reason was that it's the C2 use is not acceptable in this location. And I think where Mr. Stranks was trying to get to was the because. And what is that because? Because it is still a residential use, but it's a residential use with an element of care.
Caroline, Mike's actually got a draft that he could read out. I think also, though, we need to look into the emergency access as well. On that, the Councillor Stepstone's just said. Thank you, Caroline. Mike?
Chairman, what the reason, from what I've heard, would, I think, look like is something along the lines, the application site is not suitable for change of use from C3, C2 use, adjacent to a school, lacking sufficient off-street parking where the street is used for overspill for school and out-of-school activities, where there is an existing dire situation in terms of on-street parking, difficult to access for emergency vehicles, and curbside availability is scarce. I need to weave about unsuitable at the top. I'm going to put in further intensification of the use of the site because the debate is talking about the numbers of people in there. So in the first sentence somewhere in the finished article, there would be a bit about the proposal being unsuitable because it would be a further intensification in the use of this building. Something that's about 80% of probably what the final reason I've got from what I've heard so far, if that helps, Chair.
Councillor Steptoe.
Chairman, I can't get the right words in my head here, but I think we also need to mention that there is very limited parking for existing properties because of the design of the road was never designed to take the quantity of parked vehicles that are now with the houses there. Not quite sure how the officer can word that, but I'm sure he takes my drift.
So, Katie, what's your concerns?
Sorry, it's not my item, but I think at the moment the reason for refusal, as it's come across to me, is solely around the parking element. And if it stays that way, I think members need to be clear if there is another reason, because you said it's unsuitable, and I think Caroline did ask the question about unsuitable because, and if you think it's unsuitable solely in relation to parking, we've got that, but if there is anything else, we haven't.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Councillor Constable.
Yes, it's unsuitable for the change of use, that it isn't going to be a residential home, it's going to be a hospital, care home, or the use of it is not suitable for that area, regardless of whether it's for mental health or old people or even young children. It is not a suitable location for that sort of property. I think I can't be any clearer than that. I don't know if I can give you an exact reason, but it's just unsuitable.
I think all I'm concerned with is that in our ability to articulate on your behalf in an appeal, if that is where this goes, I still think we need the answer to why, if it's more than parking.
Can I, thank you, Katie, thank you, Councillor Polsville. Can I bring you in, Councillor Knight?
I just think the change of use is unacceptable for the area. It needs to be in an area where there's more amenities available, readily available, and public transport. I don't know Great Wakering. I haven't ventured down there, but I don't know what the public transport links are like. I just think it's something that is being used for this
So effectively what we're saying is the location is unsuitable for the type of Thank you, Councillor Knight. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chair. What I don't understand at the moment is that I realise there's going to be another resident. But if you had a family of 10, because there are families of 10, and you have 5 cars, where are you going to put the other 5? That's what I'm getting at, is that I thought we was just debating not whether it was suitable or not, because the family home is a family home, whether you've got 10 people in it or whether you've got 20 people.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. I think what Katie Rogers is actually saying is exactly what you're saying. It's all, we've got parking, but we need to come up with something else because parking alone is not suitable enough. Councillor Eaves?
I wonder if we could categorise this under overdevelopment, because the house was never designed for the amount of occupancy that it's got or is proposed. And I'm searching in my head for something that is a planning issue that we can actually add to that. Now, I know it's already been a residence, but it hasn't been a residence for that amount of people. So it's just a question. I'm not sure whether that would be something that we could actually hook onto.
Caroline. Thank you, Councillor Eaves.
Thank you. So we're going back to the change of use is unacceptable because what you need to do is identify and be really specific and justify where the harm is coming from. So what officers have tried to do is to say, well, if effectively you've got 5 people plus carers living in a residential setting, a type of residential home, how is that different from a house next door or down the road where there's 7 people living, 2 adults, 5 children, or whatever the combination is? What is the bit that tips that balance again from a single dwelling house with a single family to a house which has different occupiers who are still forming a single household, but not in an HMO way that I think I heard mentioned. So what is where is the harm coming from by those people living in that situation? That's what we need to really try and nail down to get a reason that we can defend.
Okay, Councillor. Thank you, Caroline. Councillor Myers.
Yeah, all I was going to say basically is its geographical location isn't suitable for what they're trying to put into it. Yes, it's a residential estate. Everybody has got families, they've got cars, but this is going to increase those cars, not only because if you put a family in there, they're not going to have ambulances or police turning up on a regular basis, which the one at 341 Little Wakering Road does, which seemed to be missed by the inspector. So I remember the evidence given at that particular case was at least once a week. And we, Councillor refers to myself, live on the same road, and there are quite often ambulances and police cars going past, going to that particular place. And it's just geographically, because it's in the end of a cul-de-sac, the actual access to it isn't suitable, A, for emergency vehicles, and B, for all the visitors, staff, and everything else going to be there.
Councillor Myers, thank you. Councillor Steptoe, I think what we'll do is we'll actually go to the vote, and then if it's voted in that way, we can then come back to you to put the meat on it, because if the vote doesn't go that way, then... So. Okay. What I believe that we will members, please. What I believe we'll go with is the parking may be enough in respect of what that is going to cause, linked with the emergency access on that. So Mike is going to read it out, and then we'll go to the vote.
Just before you go to the vote, we was asked what would make this building stand out from a residential building, and one particular part would be commercial waste bins. It would then be commercial, as opposed to 3 dustbins. You would end up with 2 or 3 commercial bins, as opposed to normal dustbins.
Thank you, Councillor
It's
Bolt.
a commercial building.
Chair, sorry, a bit of a play on words. We're not looking at a literal standout, like different coloured windows, curtains, rubbish bins. When we say about what makes it stand out, we're looking at that flesh that I said earlier on. Now, members raised about, how about overdevelopment? Overdevelopment is just a term. You then have to say, well, why is it overdevelopment? You see this term used a lot, overdevelopment, when we're planning new housing, and you say it's got not enough garden area, there's no side isolation spaces, the buildings overlook. You have flesh that amount to overdevelopment. What we've been trying to help you with is that you've given very clear, and you keep saying it's unsuitable. We're trying to pull from you what you mean by unsuitable. Imagine if this was something on the telly, one of these crime dramas, and they're interviewing, interrogating a witness. They're trying to say what your evidence was in terms of the phrases that you've limited in use. You've got to be able to expand. When you say it's unsuitable, why is it unsuitable? And I don't think you need to go down the idea of rubbish bin saying that makes it stand out because it just doesn't look like all the others. That's not what we mean by stand out. What we try and say is that the adverse consequences of perhaps the intensity in use for car parking, which everybody who seems to start saying, well, it's unsuitable because you're all switching back on, can't get the emergency vehicles down there, parking both sides and all that. We've got all that. So what it seems we have, the chairman's asked me to read out a reason, but it's a mess now, is it's unsuitable, we get. I've suggested that you add to it, if you vote that way, on the intensity, because the intensity is the consequence of all the extra things that you're saying. And then you go in about the access to emergency services, all the lack of car parking, the dire situation that we've got here. That gives you some flesh. There's no need in there to say, well, all the other houses would perhaps have 2 cars parked on the frontage and this would have 4. That makes it stand out. When we say stand out, that's not what we mean, physically stand out. We mean what we're trying to say, what your reason means in terms of it being harm and problematic, so bad that permission should not be granted. And at the moment, probably 95% of everything we've heard has quickly gone into highways reasons, which we've got. So your unsuitable use would largely be due to highway reasons, the parking chaos, the school activities outside of school hours, as well as drop-offs. We've got plenty of that. We've even got pictures of parking both sides of the street, etc. So as long as you're content that the reason is going to say it's unsuitable for what is mostly parking and highway reasons, then that's the sentiment of the reasons you have so far.
Thank you. While Mike just formulates that together to read out, Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chairman. Another reason I think the change of use is not suitable is that the people that are going to go in there with issues, and we don't know what they are, so I'm not going to say, but they may need to go out and around the area. And I'm not knocking anyone who lives in Great Wakering, please don't think but there is not enough for people to do to stimulate people who may have mental health issues. There's nothing there. Yeah, there might be sports facilities in the park or something, but I do think if we're going to have a change of use for this facility, it needs to be in an area that there are proper facilities, i.e. like they've got in Southend. There's odd drop-in centres for people with issues like this, agencies that can help them. There's hardly any public transport in Great Wakering. Someone said it's one a day, but I think there's more than that. Oh, sorry, I've just been clarified it's 2. But if they need to see an agency to help them on their way to progress, this isn't the right place for this facility. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Chair.
We are going to go. I'll just take Councillor Steptoe first, and then.
Thank you, Chairman. Picking up on Councillor Stanley's point, if you've got mum and dad living there with 5 kids, you're not going to have 5 lots of mums and dads come in and visit. If you've got 5 patients, you've got the potential of 5 mums and dads coming and visiting. So I would say that it is intensification of the parking issue. The other issue I would also add in is the impact on the character of the area and on the neighbourhood.
Okay, thank you for that, Nagla.
Chair, may I advise members of the committee that the identity of the occupier of a particular building which you're looking at is not a relevant material planning consideration. So in order to avoid a loss at appeal or a costs award, I would recommend that that is not one of the reasons that you refuse this
Okay,
application.
thank you, Nagla. We're actually...
Shall I just address the other 2 points, Chair?
We were actually going to go with the parking one. Though we were just filling in respect to the change of use. But yes, carry on.
Sorry, Chair. It's just because they've been raised as potential reasons for refusal. I thought I should advise.
Yep, absolutely fine.
The intensification of the use. I think that is something that. Normally, overdevelopment, for example, relates to the amount of space on a piece of land. So the building remains the same. So that's not. I wouldn't recommend that be a reason for refusal. I think given your indication, we will need to find some wording that captures the intensification of the use in terms of the impact on the area by the frequent visits or the increased visits that members have indicated they're concerned about. And finally, the access, there's no difference in the ability of an emergency access vehicle to the end of the cul-de-sac now as it would be with this particular proposed development. So again, I would advise you not to make that a reason for refusal because I think it's unlikely to succeed. And generally, as your legal advisor, I'm also required to advise you that the parking grounds that have been put forward, which suggest that this development is inappropriate because of the loss of one on-street parking space, is unlikely to succeed at appeal. Thank you.
Sorry. Mike.
Chairman, I regret it's not in its final form, but I hope members will allow me to tidy it up for the final decision notice if this is the way it goes. But the reason is going to read, we're asking you to vote on a reason that will sound something like, the application site is not suitable for a change of use from C3 to C2 use, given the very limited parking for existing properties for the design of the street, adjacent to a school, lacking sufficient off-street parking where the street is used for overspill, for school use and for out-of-school activities, where there is an existing dire situation in terms of on-street parking, difficult to access for emergency vehicles, and a lack of curbside availability. And that's somewhere where I should put intensification, possibly at the beginning, like I said. And then there is the impact on the character of the neighbourhood, which I think was going down the road with the bins, but the idea that the use is designed as a residential dwelling and it's unsuited to an intense use. Something along those lines, Chairman, I think we can work up as a final reason. It'll only had a bit of grammar and something time, but that's probably, if members understand what I've just said, something you could vote on.
Okay, before we do that, and it does make sense, but what Nagla said also, unfortunately, is concerning, that she reckons that will not
Chair, my duty is to advise you. Of course, it is entirely up to you to make a decision on the reasons and the reasons that you want to give. But, you know, I'm just obliged to advise you, but you don't have to follow my advice, of course.
Okay, just before we go, Councillor Stanley, Quick one.
A quick one, Chair. Could we put in there, because of the extended residential personnel, that there is no soundproof barriers in the building?
I think we've actually covered that, Mike.
Have we covered something like that?
Chairman, it was a previous recommendation to you, but we dropped it in this revised recommendation because conditions have to be reasonable. And it was felt with hindsight that we shouldn't have recommended that to you as not being a reasonable thing to ask for.
Okay, thank you, Mike. We'll do that.
But if members said it needed that would be away from the reasons you got. You'd have to have it as a second reason.
That's right.
Support.
Thank you, Mike. So we have a motion. We have the the meat put on the bones of that motion. We have a proposer. We have a seconder. Shall we? We'll now go to the vote. So those in favour of the motion, please, with a show of hands. This is to refuse. This is for refusal. Those in against the motion, and those abstaining. That motion has been carried. We will obviously Mike and the officers will put that together and put the paperwork through for refusal. That concludes our business for this evening. Thank you for your attendance. Meeting ended at 21:56. Thank you.